The sun set behind the sprawling mansion, where her father walked casting long shadows over the lush, manicured lawn. Lina adjusted the scarf around her neck, trying to look presentable. Despite her modest clothes at 19, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, her sharp mind and determination shining through her gentle demeanor. Her father, Robert, had spent years driving for the wealthy Carter family, a road that demanded long hours and unquestioning loyalty. Tonight, Lina accompanied her father to a high society party. As she stepped out of their old battered car, her eyes widened at the sight of the grandeur. The estate sparkled with fairy lights, and waiters dressed in crisp uniforms moved effortlessly through the crowd of elite guests. Lina felt out of place in this world of luxury, but tried to hide her discomfort. "Stay close to me," Robert whispered, as they walked toward the servants' quarters at the back of the mansion. "These people, they're not like us." Lina nodded, her heart racing. She knew this evening wasn't about her. She was there to help her father and avoid drawing attention. But fate had other plans inside the mansion. Laughter and music echoed through the grand halls. Among the crowd were Dylan, Logan, and Brent, the privileged sons of the city's wealthiest families, known for their arrogance and reckless behavior. They thrived on attention and enjoyed wielding their power over anyone they considered beneath them. The three boys leaned against the marble bar, sipping expensive cocktails and scanning the room for entertainment when their eyes landed on Lina. A smirk spread across Dylan's face. "Who's that?" he asked, nudging Logan. "Driver's daughter," Logan replied dismissively. "Not worth your time." But Dylan wasn't one to let a potential source of amusement slip by. "Let's see if she can handle us." Minutes later, Lina found herself reluctantly engaged in conversation with the boys. They bombarded her with questions, their tone dripping with condescension. "So Lina," Brent drawled, "do you clean cars like your dad?" "No," Lina replied calmly, her voice steady, "but I'm studying to become an architect." The boys burst into laughter. "An architect?" Dylan scoffed. "And where do you plan to work? Fixing up our pool houses." Lina's cheeks burned, but she refused to let them see her falter. "One day," she said firmly, "I'll build something your family depends on." The boldness of her response silenced them for a moment. Then Dylan, not one to be outdone, sneered. "We'll see about that." Their laughter echoed as they walked away, leaving Lina standing alone. She felt a mix of anger and humiliation, but quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't her world, and she had no desire to let their cruelty define her. She turned to look for her father, eager to leave. Unbeknownst to her, the boys weren't done. Dylan, still fuming from her defiance, hatched a plan. Let's teach her a lesson," he whispered to his friends, his voice laced with malice. The other two nodded, their expressions darkening. Lina didn't realize that her courage had painted a target on her back. As the party continued, the seeds of a life-altering tragedy were sown. For now, she remained unaware, focusing instead on her father's voice of caution in her mind. "Keep your head down and stay out of trouble." But trouble was already looking for her. The party stretched late into the evening, the atmosphere growing more unruly as the alcohol flowed freely. Lina stayed close to the servants' quarters, helping her father with small tasks and trying to avoid the gaze of the wealthy guests. Her father, Robert, checked his watch nervously. "Lina, finish up here quickly. We'll leave soon," he said, sensing the rowdy behavior of the partygoers. He didn't want his daughter exposed to their world for too long. Lina nodded and stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The cool night breeze offered a brief reprieve from the overwhelming noise inside. She leaned against the pillar, looking up at the stars and dreaming of a life far removed from this place. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over her. She turned to see Dylan, flanked by Logan and Brent. They wore smug smiles, and Lina's heart sank. She tried to walk away, but Dylan stepped into her path. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice slick with mockery. "I don't want any trouble," Lina said, her tone firm but weary. She attempted to move past them again, but Brent grabbed her arm, his grip uncomfortably tight. "Relax," Brent said, his tone falsely friendly. "We just want to talk." Fear shot through her as she looked into their eyes, realizing this was no innocent encounter. "Let me go," she said, her voice rising. Dylan laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the quiet of the garden. "Why are you acting so high and mighty? You think you're better than us?" "I don't think anything," Lina said, struggling to free her arm. Just leave me alone. But the more she resisted, the more entertained they seemed. Her defiance only fueled their twisted sense of power. Before she could scream, Dylan clamped a hand over her mouth and dragged her toward the back of the estate, away from the lights and noise. The next moment bled into a nightmare. Lina's mind screamed in protest, but her voice was silenced by the overwhelming force of her attackers. In the darkness, they tore away her dignity, their laughter a cruel soundtrack to her pain. She fought with everything she had, but their strength and numbers overwhelmed her. When it was over, they left her broken and alone, their laughter fading as they disappeared into the night. Lina lay trembling on the cold ground, tears streaming down her face. Shame, anger, and fear consumed her. But the worst was the helplessness, the knowledge that no one would believe her, a driver's daughter, over the privileged sons of powerful men. Some time passed before Robert found her. He had grown worried when she didn't return and began searching the estate. When he saw her crumpled form in the shadows, his heart broke. "Lina," he cried, rushing to her side. "What happened? Who did this?" She clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to find the words to explain. Her father held her tightly, vowing silently to protect her no matter what. He helped her to her feet and led her back to their car, shielding her from the curious stares of other servants and guests. As they drove home, Lina finally spoke, her voice trembling. It was them, the Carter boys and their friends. Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He wanted to storm back to the estate and confront them, but he knew the futility of such an action. They were rich, powerful, and untouchable. The system was designed to protect people like them, not someone like his daughter. "Don't say anything, Lina," Robert said softly. "If we speak out, they'll ruin us." "But Papa," Lina started, her voice breaking. "I know, my child," he interrupted, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "But we have no power here." The days that followed were a blur of pain and silence. Lina stayed confined to her room, unable to face the world. News of the incident spread among the staff at the Carter estate, but fear kept everyone quiet. Dylan and his friends carried on with their lives as if nothing had happened, their privilege shielding them from any consequences. Lina's family faced subtle threats and intimidation. The Carter family made it clear that any attempt to press charges would result in dire consequences for Robert's livelihood and Lina's reputation. "You think anyone will believe a driver's daughter over the sons of this city's most powerful families?" A lawyer representing the Carters sneered during a private meeting with Robert. "Be smart and stay silent." Lina felt trapped, suffocated by her helplessness and the injustice of it all. But deep inside her, a spark of defiance remained. She vowed that one day, when she had the strength and the means, she would make them pay for what they had done. The days after the assault were harrowing. Descent into darkness for Lina, her once bright eyes now reflected pain, her dreams crushed under the weight of her trauma. The small community she lived in quickly became a hostile place as whispers of the incident spread, though the truth was distorted by those who sought to protect the powerful. Lina avoided stepping outside her home. Every glance from neighbors seemed to carry judgment or pity. Her father, Robert, did his best to shield her, but even his shoulders sagged under the immense weight of guilt and helplessness. "Why should we live in shame for what they did?" Lina whispered one night, tears streaming down her face as she sat with her father in their tiny living room. Robert reached out, holding her hands in his. "Because, child, the world is cruel, and the ones with power make the rules. But it's not fair," she cried, her voice breaking. "Why do they get to live without consequences?" Her father had no answer, only silence. He knew she was right, but he also knew that challenging the Carter family would ruin what little they had left. Lina stared at him for a long moment. Part of her ached with gratitude for his protection, but another part, a sharper, quieter part, resented him. For not doing more, for being too afraid. As months turned into years, the pain became a constant companion for Lina. Her once promising dreams of higher education and a career in architecture were replaced by the harsh reality of survival. The little money her father had was barely enough to cover their needs, let alone fund her college aspirations. Lina attempted to move on, trying to suppress her trauma, but the scars ran deep. Every time she closed her eyes, she relived that night. The laughter of her attackers haunted her, and the suffocating feeling of powerlessness consumed her. Eventually, Lina decided she couldn't remain in the town any longer. "I need to leave, Papa," she said one morning, her voice heavy with determination. "If I stay here, I'll never heal." Robert hesitated but ultimately nodded. "You're right. Go build a new life. But promise me one thing. Don't let this world break you," she promised. With just a small bag of belongings and a heart full of pain, Lina left for the city. The bustling streets of Lagos, where in stark contrast to the suffocating small town she had left behind, she was just another face in the crowd. And the anonymity felt like a balm to her wounded soul. Lina found work as a waitress in a small cafe. The long hours and meager pay barely covered her rent and food, but she was determined. She began saving every rupee she could spare, her goal of returning to education burning brightly in her mind. By night, she read borrowed textbooks under the dim light of her single-room apartment. She devoured knowledge, reminding herself of the ambitious girl she once was. Slowly, her focus shifted from her pain to her purpose. "I'll make something of myself," she whispered to herself one night, "and when I do, I'll make them pay." It was during her work at the cafe that Lina's life took a pivotal turn. One day, she overheard a conversation between two patrons about a local lawyer who was making waves by representing marginalized communities. Inspired, Lina mustered the courage to visit the lawyer's office. The lawyer, an empathetic woman named Neka, listened to Lina's story without judgment. "You've been through hell," Nika said, her eyes soft but resolute, "and you survived. That's strength, Lina. What do you want to do now?" "I want to fight," Lina said, her voice steady for the first time in years. "Not just for me, but for others like me." Nika encouraged her to pursue a degree in law, even offering to mentor her. Lina knew it wouldn't be easy, balancing work, studies, and her emotional recovery. But for the first time in years, she felt hope. Over the next decade, Lina's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. She juggled part-time jobs and her law degree, excelling in her studies despite the odds stacked against her. Her focus was on weaving her trauma into purpose, fueling her drive to bring justice to those who had been silenced like her. By the time she graduated, Lina had already built a reputation for her dedication and intellect. She joined Neka's law firm, quickly becoming a fierce advocate for victims of sexual violence and systemic oppression. Each case she won felt like a small victory in her own battle for justice. But even as she grew in confidence and stature, the memory of her attackers lingered in the back of her mind. She kept tabs on them, watching from afar as Dylan, Logan, and Brent rose to prominence as businessmen and socialites. Their success only deepened her resolve. "They think they've gotten away with it," she thought. "But their time will come." 10 years after leaving her hometown, Lina received news that set her plan into motion. The Carter family was hosting a grand event to celebrate their new business venture, and Dylan, Logan, and Brent were the guests of honor. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Lina packed her bags and prepared to return to the place that had once broken her. This time, she was no longer the timid girl they had preyed upon. She was a woman of power and purpose, armed with knowledge and an unshakable determination to hold them accountable. As she boarded the train back to her hometown, her heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. The stage was set for her long-awaited reckoning. The train pulled into the station with a screech, jolting Lina from her thoughts. She stepped onto the platform, her heels clicking against the worn concrete. The town looked smaller than she remembered, its streets lined with familiar buildings that seemed to have aged along with her memories. But Lina was no longer the frightened girl who had fled years ago. She was a woman on a mission. Her return was deliberate, carefully planned to coincide with the Carter family's grand event, a gala hosted at the same estate where her life had been shattered, now celebrating a merger between their businesses. The guest list was a who's who of influential figures: politicians, businessmen, and media moguls. Dylan, Logan, and Brent were the stars of the evening. Lina's presence in the town didn't go unnoticed. Those who recognized her couldn't help but whisper. Gone was the meek driver's daughter. She now exuded confidence, her sharp features accentuated by her tailored suit and piercing gaze. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had fought her way out of the darkness. Her first stop was her old home where her father still lived. Robert was older now, his hair grayer, his movements slower, but his face lit up when he saw her. "Lina," he exclaimed, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You've come back. I've missed you, Papa," she said, her voice softening for the first time in days. As they sat together catching up, Lina told him about her life in the city, her education, her career, and the cases she had fought for others. She spared him the details of her plan, not wanting to burden him with worry. "I'm proud of you," Robert said, his eyes glistening. "You've become everything I knew you could be." Lina smiled, but didn't let herself linger in sentimentality. She had work to do. The night of the gala arrived, and Lina stood outside the Carter estate, the memories of her last visit threatening to overwhelm her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She wasn't here to relive the past. She was here to reclaim her power. Inside, the atmosphere was opulent, the hall buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. Lina walked in with quiet confidence, her every move calculated. Heads turned as she entered, her striking presence commanding attention. Most of the guests didn't know her, but those who did whispered her name in disbelief. She spotted Dylan, Logan, and Brent near the bar, surrounded by a group of admirers. They looked older, but just as smug, their laughter echoing through the room. Lina's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain composed. Tonight wasn't about raw emotion. It was about strategy. Lina had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She had dug into their lives, uncovering a web of corruption, illegal business deals, and scandals. The evidence she had gathered wasn't just about their crimes from that fateful night. It painted a broader picture of their abuse of power. For days, she had imagined this moment, how it would feel to walk into their world and dismantle it piece by piece. Sometimes, the fantasy turned darker. Public disgrace, reputations ruined, their fear mirroring hers. It gave her energy, but it also scared her. She couldn't let revenge poison her purpose. She reminded herself this was about justice, not destruction. Over the years, her first move was subtle. She approached a journalist she had invited to the gala under the pretense of exposing a corporate scandal. The journalist, intrigued by Lina's reputation, agreed to publish a series of articles based on the evidence she had provided. As the night progressed, Lina began planting seeds of doubt among the guests. She struck up conversations with influential figures, dropping hints about the Carters' less-than-clean past. Her words were careful, calculated to sow suspicion without revealing too much. Toward the end of the evening, Lina made her way to the trio. Their expressions shifted from confusion to recognition as she approached. "Lina," Dylan said, his smirk faltering. "What are you doing here?" "I came to congratulate you," she said, her tone even. "I see it seems you've built quite a legacy." Logan's eyes narrowed. "Why do I feel like you didn't come here just to celebrate?" Lina leaned in, her voice low but firm. "You're right. I'm here to remind you of the night you thought you could destroy me." Their faces paled as her words sank in. For the first time, they looked unsettled. "You can't prove anything," Brent snapped, his bravado cracking. "That was years ago." Lina smiled, a cold, her calculated smile. "Maybe I can, maybe I can't. But let's see how the world reacts when they hear my story." Before they could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving them to stew in their growing panic. The next morning, the headlines hit. Articles detailing the Carters' illegal dealings and abusive behavior dominated the news cycle. Lina's story was carefully woven into the narrative, presented in a way that avoided naming her directly, but painted a vivid picture of their crimes. Social media exploded with outrage, demanding accountability. Victims of the trio's other misdeeds began coming forward. Emboldened by the exposure, the once celebrated businessmen found themselves cornered, their reputations in tatters. Lina watched from a distance, her emotions a mix of vindication and exhaustion. The battle wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of legal action. But the tide had turned. Lina filed a formal case against the trio, using the evidence she had collected to build a strong argument. The Carters tried to use their wealth and connections to suppress the case, but public opinion was no longer on their side. Activists and media outlets rallied behind Lina, amplifying her voice and ensuring the case stayed in the spotlight. The legal proceedings were long and grueling, but Lina's preparation and resilience paid off. The court found the trio guilty of multiple crimes, including assault, fraud, and witness intimidation. Their sentences were severe, stripping them of their freedom and tarnishing their family's legacy. Lina's return had sent shockwaves through the community, dismantling the facade of invincibility that had protected her attackers for so long. The girl they had tried to silence had become their greatest undoing. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with tension. Every seat was filled, and cameras from major news outlets lined the back wall. Lina stood at the plaintiff's table, calm but resolute. This was the culmination of years of pain, preparation, and perseverance. Across the room, Dylan, Logan, and Brent sat with their high-priced legal team, their expressions betraying a mix of fear and defiance. Lina's lawyer, Neka, opened with a powerful statement. This case is about accountability, power, and the abuse of privilege. The defendants thought their wealth and influence would shield them from justice. Today, we prove them wrong. The prosecution began to methodically present the evidence. Lina had spent years gathering emails, bank records, and witness testimonies. It painted a damning picture, not just of the assault that had changed Lina's life, but of a pattern of criminal behavior spanning decades. One by one, witnesses took the stand. First was a former employee of the Carter family, a maid who had been silenced years ago after witnessing Dylan's violent behavior toward another young woman. She recounted the threats and bribes she had faced, her voice trembling but steady. "I was too scared to speak back then," she said, looking at Lina. "But seeing you fight, it gave me the courage to tell the truth." Next came Logan's former business partner, who testified about fraudulent activities and embezzlement schemes. His testimony tied their financial crimes to a broader web of corruption, exposing the trio's arrogance and carelessness. The most powerful moments came when Lina herself took the stand. She recounted the events of that fateful night with clarity and emotion, sparing no detail about the assault or its aftermath. Her voice didn't waver, even as the defense tried to discredit her. "I was broken," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the jury. "But I refuse to let that be the end of my story. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has suffered in silence. Because people like them believe they are untouchable." The defense lawyers attempted to paint Lina as vengeful and unreliable, but their tactics backfired. The evidence was overwhelming, and their arguments seemed hollow in the face of Lina's strength and the growing public outrage. In a desperate move, Dylan took the stand to testify in his own defense. His arrogance, however, proved to be his undoing. Under cross-examination by Neka, he stumbled, contradicting himself and inadvertently confirming key details of the prosecution's case. The courtroom murmured as the realization set in. The truth was undeniable. Outside the courtroom, protesters gathered, holding signs demanding justice. The case had sparked a nationwide conversation about privilege, corruption, and sexual violence. The Carters' once flawless reputation was now in shambles. Their businesses faced boycotts and investors pulled out of deals. The trio's fall from grace was swift and public. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a unanimous decision. The courtroom was silent as the foreman read the verdict. Guilty. Guilty of assault, fraud, and witness tampering. The sentences were harsh. Years in prison, hefty fines, and the loss of their business licenses. Lina exhaled, the weight of the years finally lifting from her shoulders. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had suffered because of their unchecked power. Later that evening, Lina stood outside the courthouse, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Reporters surrounded her, microphones thrust forward, but she didn't shy away. "What do you want people to take away from this case?" one journalist asked. Lina paused before answering, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about me or them. It's about breaking the cycle of silence and fear. No one should be above the law, no matter how rich or powerful they are." Her words resonated, sparking applause from the crowd. Lina had become more than just a survivor. She was now a symbol of justice and resilience. Despite the victory, Lina knew her journey wasn't over. The scars of her trauma would always remain, but she was determined to use her experience to help others. She returned to the city and founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting survivors of sexual violence and advocating for systemic change. The organization, named Phoenix Rising, quickly gained traction through legal aid, counseling, and awareness campaigns. It became a beacon of hope for countless individuals. Lina ran it with fierce dedication, sometimes too fierce. Her drive and perfectionism pushed those around her, and while her staff admired her passion, whispers of her intensity circulated quietly among interns and junior advocates. She demanded excellence, because failure in her world had once cost everything. Months later, Lina returned to the Carter estate one last time. The grand mansion, now abandoned and falling into disrepair, stood as a haunting reminder of her past. She walked through the overgrown gardens, her footsteps echoing in the silence, standing in the spot where her life had changed forever. She closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. But this time, instead of feeling pain, she felt a deep sense of peace. "They didn't win," she whispered to herself. "I did." Lina left the estate, her head held high, ready to embrace the future she had fought so hard to create. The conviction of Dylan, Logan, and Brent sent ripples through society. Once celebrated as the golden sons of their families, they now bore the labels of criminals. The once pristine Carter name was irreversibly tarnished, and their families, once powerful and untouchable, were left scrambling to salvage what little remained of their reputation. The Carter family's business empire began to crumble. Investors pulled out in droves, unwilling to associate with a name now synonymous with scandal. The trio's fraudulent dealings, unearthed during the trial, led to multiple lawsuits from former partners and clients, draining the Carters' vast wealth. Dylan's family, who had prided themselves on their influence, found themselves ostracized by their elite social circles. Invitations to high society events dried up, and former allies turned their backs, fearing association with the disgraced family. Logan's family faced foreclosure on their lavish properties. As legal fees mounted, Brent's father, a prominent politician, was forced to resign amid mounting public pressure. Prison life was a stark contrast to the life of privilege the trio had always known. Dylan, who had thrived on control, now faced a world where his wealth and power meant nothing. Logan, who had always relied on his charm to manipulate others, found himself isolated and despised. Brent, the quietest of the three, struggled to adapt to the harsh realities of prison life. Inside those walls, they were no longer the kings of their domain. Other inmates, aware of their crimes, made their lives difficult. For the first time, they felt the fear and helplessness they had inflicted on others. Back in their hometown, the community that had once revered the Carter family found its voice. People who had been silenced by fear began speaking out about years of mistreatment and exploitation. Former employees of the family shared their stories, revealing a long history of abuse of power. For Lina, watching their downfall brought a complex mix of emotions. She had fought for this moment for years, but it didn't bring the sense of triumph she had expected. Instead, it felt like a step in a much larger journey. Sitting in her office at Phoenix Rising, she wrote in her journal, a habit she had adopted to process her emotions. "Justice isn't about revenge," she wrote. "It's about accountability, about making sure no one else has to endure what I did. This isn't the end, it's the beginning of something much bigger." Lina poured herself into her work, using her platform to highlight systemic issues and push for legal reforms. She spoke at universities, rallies, and conferences, sharing her story and inspiring others to fight for change. But for all the strength she projected on stage and in courtrooms, Lina kept people at arm's length. She hadn't let anyone get too close, not really. Vulnerability still felt dangerous, even after all these years. It was easier to stay busy than to open her heart. Years later, Lina found herself reflecting on her journey. She visited her father, now retired and living a peaceful life in the home she had bought for him. They sat together in the garden, sipping tea as the sun set. "I still can't believe how far you've come," Robert said, his voice filled with pride. "You've changed so many lives." Lina smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I couldn't have done it without you, Papa. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Robert reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You gave me hope when I had none." "I'm proud of you, Lina. And I know your mother would be too." One day, Lina received a letter from a young girl who had been following her story. The girl, a survivor of abuse, wrote about how Lina's courage had inspired her to speak out and seek justice. Lina read the letter with tears in her eyes. It was a reminder that her fight wasn't just about her past. It was about shaping a better future. As she folded the letter, Lina stood and walked to her office window. The city skyline stretched before her, a symbol of how far she had come and how far there was still to go. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself. "There's so much more to do." The road ahead was still long, but Lina was ready. She had found her voice, her strength, and her purpose. And she knew she would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been silenced. Lina smiled, a quiet but determined smile, as she stepped forward into her next chapter. If you know someone who needs this, share this story with her, and don't forget to subscribe to our African F Tales channel.